Hi, this is Dovid Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Whether you watch with our friends over at Torah Anytime, wherever you watch or listen to a podcast, it's always nice to have you along. Do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. It was interesting when we put up a video about my trip to America, and somebody said, I guess it pays to like that also, or to comment. There's no question about it. That definitely is. I have to tell you, I was sitting here thinking as I say, hi, this is Dovid Orlofsky. Welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. You must know by now. I don't know why I have to say that every single time, But it could be that, as happens from time to time, someone suddenly discovers the show. And I hear people who suddenly contact me and say, I didn't even know you had a podcast. And it's ironic, when I mentioned that we have about 20,000 listeners. And among the nasty comments that I got when I did my Tuvia Singer show, is someone says, 20,000, who are you kidding? So I actually comment. I didn't comment on most of them, but I commented. I said, well, we're on multiple platforms. It's not just on YouTube. It's on our friends over at Torah Anytime. It's on Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify. It's on a lot of different platforms. And the irony is that even on YouTube, that video now has 22,000 views. So, what can I tell you? A lot of people seem to know it, but a lot of people don't. And they suddenly discover the show. And they go back to the beginning and start listening to 6 years of me, which is, wow, that's a lot to listen to. I listened to myself for 6 years, but I have no choice. But who knows? I used to take it for granted that everyone knows who I am already. Yeah. So I would pick up the phone and I would just start talking. And, a few minutes in, someone would say, who is this? And I was surprised because I thought everyone knows who I am already. So I picked up the habit of whenever I call anyone, I say, Shalom, this is Dovid Orlofsky calling from Eretz Yisrael. And my mother over Shalom would say, I know who you are, son. And I said, listen, I'm not taking any bets anymore. People might not know who I am. So I am Dovid Orlofsky, and this is the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And we have a sponsor. And as I've mentioned in the past few episodes, we are towards the end of our sponsorships. So this might be a wonderful opportunity for you to either support what we do over here because you think it's important, or to honor or memorialize somebody who's important in your life. And, we could use your help. And speaking about help, just before we get to our sponsorship, we have only one more show after this with our producer, Yisrael, who, of course, took over for producer Michael, and he is moving on to greener pastures. So we have a position open for a producer who has the requisite abilities and experience to be able to film, edit, and post and keep track of all the stuff that we're doing over here. And if you think that you are that sort of a talented person, please reach out to us, and we're going to see, because otherwise it's either going to be me sitting there with my phone filming myself like a hostage video, or it's going to be another hiatus where I'll get all those emails. Are you all right? Is everything okay? Yep, we just lost our producer. So if you think you're that talented someone and you're looking for a golden opportunity to be able to be Marbitz Torah for very little money, this is the place to come. So opportunities abound, and just reach out to us. In the meantime, our sponsor for this week is sponsored anonymously, in tremendous gratitude for all the chizuk that you provide to all your listeners each and every week! ! May this sponsorship be a schus for a shidduch for Rivka Bas Rezel very soon. So Rivka Bas Rezel should be zeiche to a shidduch hagun b'mehera v'yameinu, and we hope to hear good news. And if so, we might be on to a whole new area over here. of schoolers. I will just tell you the following. When, I had two girls and then I had a boy. And my father said, listen, give the son the curse to your father-in-law. I'll take the next one. Well, 5 girls later, when he was already dying from Yena Machla, and I had told him it was a girl, he says, look, I can't say I'm not disappointed. I had made arrangements to be medevac to Israel in order to be able to be sandik by you. He didn't make it. I said, all right, well, Mr. Hashem, I'll have a boy afterwards to name for him. And I had another girl. And so I started looking along for segulas. And by the way, we've asked to talk about segulas. We will talk about it in a future episode. But one that they say is to buy kol norim. So I bought kol norim, and then next year I did not have a baby boy. So I didn't buy it the next year. I had spent a lot of money. And the gabbai says, you're not bidding this year? I said, well, it didn't work, He says, what? And if you turn the key in your car and it doesn't start right away, what do? Throw away the car or you turn it again? Thought that was an interesting idea. So what can I tell you? We will do the best that we can over here, myself and all of Klal Yisrael, to daven. For Ashidach and Mitzvah Hashem. The Schus HaRabim should all work together to help accomplish these wonderful things. And if not, so turn the key again. Okay. Let's get down to our topic at hand. And like some of the past episodes, the topic actually comes out of a question that was submitted to the question and answer. And every now and then I get a question that producer Yisrael pointed out that, it used to be that I gave very short answers to questions. And now it seems like we only get through one question in the question and answer portion of the episode. You're giving much longer answers. So the truth is, not because I've changed, but the nature of the questions change. So if a person asks a question like, who's your favorite superhero? That's a lot easier than having to deal with a question like, how do you explain Tzimtzum? Or could you explain the Masorah? Or what should be my kavanas during Shemona Esrei? These things take more time, as you can imagine. So every now and then it's a very long question, and it takes the entire, probably would take most of an episode to answer. And so I say, we'll file those away and save it for an actual episode that I will dedicate to it. It's interesting when we talk about question and answers. I remember when I taught in Discovery, I was on a question and answer panel. I would have a panel at the end for question and answers. It was myself, it was Mati Berger, and it was Ari Khan. And we each had a particular dynamic that we played. Now, I'm telling this story. I know that I have Hasidim out there who know everything I've ever said, and you'll already know this story because people always will come over to me and just tell me the punchline. But for those of you dilettantes out there who are new to this experience, I hope you'll appreciate this story anyway. Someone explained to me, how does the dynamic work? How do you each answer the questions differently? So I said, I'll give you an example. There was a fellow from down south who was in the program. When I say down south, I mean southern United States. And he asked the following question. He says, I have a cousin who lives in Rehovot, and he says it's possible for a non-Jew to have a Jewish soul. So Mati Berger says, well, then what do you mean by a non-Jew? And Ari goes, what do you mean by a soul? And I go, what do you mean by Rehovot? So that was more or less the way we divvied it up, Mati would take a very, hard-headed, direct approach. Ari was always more spiritual, and I would just look for the absurdity in the question. So we more or less managed to make room for everybody. But when Mati would get a question, very often, he told me once, he says, my philosophy is, I'm using this as an opportunity to say another shir. And he would give a 15 to 20 minute, sometimes 30-minute answer to the question because he had a shir on it and he felt like he wanted to go through the entire topic. A lot of people don't do that. right? For example, Rabbi Dr. Gottlieb and Or Sameach, when he would do a question and answer, and someone would ask about the Holocaust, so he would say, I will not disgrace the memory of the 6 million by giving a short form answer to the Holocaust. I will not do that. If you want, I have an entire shiur on it, but I'm not going to make it a sound bite. Rav Moshe Shapiro, by the way, said a similar thing. He said he was once walking down the street, and this Avrech asked if it was rainy. He says, could I share your umbrella to the end of the street? He said, sure. He says, and as we start walking, he says, by the way, why was there a Holocaust? He says, I don't know. So the Avrech said, oh, okay. So he told this over in shiur a few times, and he said, Be'emet, if you want an answer from here to the end of the block about the Holocaust, I can't do it. I have no problem doing those kind of things. I'm good with short answers. But Mati would give actually a mini shiur on whatever the topic happened to be. He would go on for quite a while. And sometimes I would try to say something. He says, 1 second, Dovid. And he would just keep going. Now, I'm very good like that. I don't need to hear myself talk. I'm very, I have a lot of opportunities to be able to speak. I'm sure I told this story already, that the only time I spoke at the Aguda convention, so my good friend Pesach Krohn, he should have a full refuah shlema. He says, Reb Dovid, be prepared to run late. I said, why? Because everyone speaks too long. I said, why? Because they can't believe that they're speaking at the Aguda convention and they just can't stop themselves and they just keep talking. I've never had that problem, I can speak for a short amount of time. My friend Y.Y. Rubenstein, right? He used to be on the BBC, and they gave him a 5-minute slot, and he was so good they moved him up to like the next, from BBC 3 to BBC 2, I think, and they gave him a 3-minute slot, and he was so good they moved him up to BBC 1 where he had a 2-minute slot. So he says, you're looking at the only rabbi who can speak for 2 minutes. So I can do that if need be, So it's like sometimes I charge when I speak. It's the only income that I really have, and so people say, "Oh, how much do you get, for a speech?" And I tell them. He says, "Well, how long do you usually speak for?" I said, "It's usually between 45 minutes and an hour." He says, "We only need you for 10 minutes." I said, "Oh, that costs double." I can do it. But for a rabbi to speak for less time, so that's what they say. They say a rabbi who can speak for an hour is valuable, but a rabbi who can speak for 10 minutes is invaluable. Yeah. So I can speak for a very short period of time. So I don't mind that I would just sit there, like a goylem while Mati was speaking. I was okay with that. I once told somebody, I said, me and Mati agree on one thing. We disagree on one thing. We both agree that he has a lot of worthwhile things to say. We disagree as to whether or not I do. But I'm happy to listen to him. I'm always happy to listen to smart and talented people like Mati Berger. And I hope nobody thinks that I'm complaining over here or any disrespect. I'm very happy just to sit there and keep him company while he talks, which is my pleasure. I hear myself talk all the time. Anyway, so that's the idea, that sometimes it depends on the question. Some questions you can do with a short answer. Some answers take more time. Some answers take a lot of time. And I'm definitely of the opinion that if somebody already answered the question, I don't have to say it again. So very often when there's a panel, somebody will say something and the next person will say, I just want to reiterate what he just said. No, you really don't have to. He said it. Do not reiterate it. It has been iterated. That's more than enough. And I bring an example of my good friend, Rabbi YY, was running an encounter conference in Manchester. And at the end of the program, there was a panel, question and answers. It was myself, Yonason Rosenblum, Rabbi Sinclair from Or Sameach, and Rebbe Heller. And we were on the panel, and for some reason, it was like everybody on the panel had to answer every question. I don't know why exactly. So they asked Jonathan Rosenblum, since he was the political person, he writes about politics. So someone asked him, do you believe that the Haredim are doing enough to reach out to the secular community in Israel? And he answered the question. And then Rabbi Sinclair answered the question. And then Rabbi Heller answered the question. Everybody gave like a 5 to 10 minute answer, And then they asked me, Rabbi Orlofsky, do you believe that the Haredim are doing enough to reach out to the people and the secular people in Israel? And I said, no. To tremendous applause. But I mean, my frustration level reached it when they asked Rabbi Sinclair. Rabbi Sinclair had been in Hollywood and Broadway and music production, etc. And so somebody asked him, do you miss being, in the entertainment field? And he answered the question. And then Rebbe Heller answered the question. And then Rabbi Rosenblum answered the question. And then the moderator answered the question. And then they come to me. And I said, how do I know if Rabbi Sinclair misses being in Hollywood? How could I possibly give an opinion on it, But that's how it is. People love to answer these kind of questions. So me, I'm happy to let it go, to give a short answer, to not answer it at all. I'm all right with that, Sometimes I can burn through a lot of time in a question and answer just from the question, because not everybody is concise, and I've never really mastered the skill of cutting people off. So somebody would get up and they'd say, you have a question? Yeah. I have a neighbor, and her sister, it's not really her sister, it's her sister-in-law, but her sister-in-law is married to a fellow. I mean, if it's her sister-in-law, you think she'd be married to her brother, but it's not, because they got divorced and she's married to somebody else now. And they're married. They don't live in the neighborhood. They live in, where is it? It's in New Jersey. I don't remember right now. Anyway, so they're living there, and they've got 3 kids. It's a boy and 2 girls. The boy is Jim Passaic. That's where they live. Anyway, this can go on for a good 15 minutes, and I keep going, do you have a question? Yeah, I'm getting to it. And the story just keeps going and going. And everyone in the group is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Make it stop. Good Lord, make it stop. And I don't know how to stop them, because when I say, okay, could you just cut to the question? Yeah, I'm getting there. Anyway, so she drives a Honda. It just keeps going. There's no way for it to stop, So anyway, all of that is by way of introduction to this week's topic, which was a question that was submitted. And I said, this is a question that I think deserves full podcast time, although there's not much of it left. Oh, what can I tell you? That's the problem with ADD. You just keep going and going. Anyway, so the question was, what is your position on Tchelis? Now, let me comment on what that means when we say, what is my position on Tchelis? I'm definitely in favor of Tchelis. I think Tchelis is a wonderful thing, and I think it should definitely be used in the Big Day Kahuna, and etc. All those kind of wonderful things. That's not the question. The question is formulated by an idea which, again, I was exposed to by a footnote in the Living Torah. For those of you not familiar with it, the Living Torah is a translation of the Torah into English by Aryeh Kaplan Zatzal. I should point out that there are translations into a dialect that's similar to English, but should not be mistaken for English. If it has words in it like the vessel becomes impure, or my favorite is, I saw one translation translate pre-bitna as fruit of the womb. Yeah. And other things like that, right? So he translated it into English. Yeah. And the sentence structure is written that way, and he puts in the punctuation the way you would in English, as opposed to the tortured translations that people do to try to keep it as much as you can literally translated. But a literal translation, that's why I once heard my brother-in-law, Rabbi Dovid Lichtman, refer to the Targum Onkelos as a rendering instead of a translation. I thought that's a brilliant word. It's not a translation, it's a rendering. It includes a commentary inside of it, and every translation is a commentary. So he translates it in such a way. And the footnotes are unbelievable. In the back of the Chumash, he has his bibliography, where he quotes such a wide variety of sources that it's just mind-boggling. I heard a story that he writes in the introduction, it took him 9 months to do the whole thing. And the footnotes are unbelievable, and the sources that he draws upon. And after he was nifter, some people were doing, I don't remember if it was a master's or a doctoral thesis on this work, and went to the Almona and asked for the rough drafts to compare it. And she said, there are no rough drafts. He just sat down and wrote the whole thing straight. So really unbelievable. So the pasuk in Truma, Tchelis v'argaman b'tzulah shani, he translates as sky blue wool, dark red wool, wool dyed with crimson worm. And here's his comment on sky blue, which is Tchelis. Sky blue, according to Sadya, the Rambam, and Josephus. Tchelis in Hebrew. According to others, it was a greenish blue or aquamarine. Rashi, Ibn Ezra, and the Yerushalmi Brachos. Deep blue, the color of the evening sky. Menachem quoted in Rashi on Numbers 1538. Azure or ultramarine, the Radak. Or hyacinth blue, the Septuagint, the Aruch. The Talmud states that it resembled indigo, Gemara Menachos. This blue dye was taken from an animal known as the chilazon, Tosefta Menachos. It is a boneless invertebrate, Yerushalmi Shabbos, having a shell that grows with it, Dvarim Rabbah. It is thus identified with a snail of the Papura family. Ravya on Brachos, Mosef Ha'aruch. The Septuagint also occasionally translates it as Olaporphyris, which indicates that it was made from the pure dye of the Papura. There were some who identified the chilazon with the common cuttlefish, Sophia officinalis, that's the Ein Tchelis, but most evidence contradicts this. That is the Tchelis that certain Hasidim used to wear, or still do wear. That's the type of blue. It's made from the cuttlefish. It was known that the ancient Tyrians were skilled in making this dye, Divrei Yomim 2, Yecheskel 27, and that snails from which it was made were found on the coast of northern Israel and Phoenicia. Targum Yonason on Dvarim, Shabbos 26a, and Strabo. This indicates that it was the famed Tyrian blue. Around the ancient Tyrian dye works, shells of Murex trunculus and Murex brandaris are found. These dyes are also made in Greece and Italy. Yecheskel and Iliad 4:141, and Aristotle, History of the Animals 5:15. The remains of these ancient dye works have been found in Athens and Pompeii. The shells found there were Purpura hamostata and Murex brandaris. Pliny. Some have identified the chilazon with Janitha palea or Janitha bicolor, deep water snails which produce a light violet blue hyacinth dye. And that is quoting Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog from his work, The Dyeing of Purple in Ancient Israel, unpublished, written in 1919. Of course, Aryeh Kaplan must have had a copy of it. In ancient time, animals such as these were renowned for their dyes, again quoting Pliny. The dye is removed from a cyst near the head of the snail, preferably while the animal is still alive. Shabbos 75a, Aristotle, History of the Animals. It is boiled with alum as a clarifier, Gemara Menachos, also see Rashi and Avodah Zarah, to produce the dye. The wool is then ground with alkanet root or aloe wood in order for it to take the dye well. The Rambam and Pliny. Only a few drops of dye could be obtained from each snail, Pliny, and according to one modern researcher, over 8,000 snails would be needed to make a single cubic centimeter of the dye. This explains its high cost and its restriction to royalty. That is his footnote on Tchelis. And I remember when I read this, I came away less with a deep understanding of Tchelis than with a deep appreciation of Aryeh Kaplan. Because those are by no means the most bizarre works that he quotes in his notes. Yeah. In fact, when it comes to Argaman, he suggests that it's related to the Sanskrit word ragaman, which means scarlet. Not many people are familiar with Sanskrit. And I may have told this story in the past, so you'll indulge me, I hope. The National Convention of NCSY used to be in the Pineview Hotel. And there was another old hotel there that had been taken over by some Eastern cult. And a number of the rabbis and the faculty decided they were going to confront them. Now, I heard this story both from Yossi Abrams and from Rabbi Refson, who were there. And they said they all go to confront him. And the head of this cult is treated as if he himself is God, not just God's prophet, God himself. And so once they get there, they push Aryeh Kaplan up front. And he says, what is your religion based on? And he says the Hagabaga, whatever it is, some ancient work. And Aryeh Kaplan says, really, because I have 6 basic questions on that work. And God smiles beneficently at him and says, that's because you have the translation. Ours is the original Sanskrit. And Aryeh Kaplan says, yeah, I read Sanskrit. I read it in the original. Apparently God had not. So he was an unusual fellow. He wrote an English Me'em Lo'ez translation, and he didn't use the Hebrew. It was originally written in Ladino, which is sort of like a Spanish version of Yiddish, combination of Jewish and Spanish. And it was translated into Hebrew, and he was reading the Hebrew, and he didn't like the translation, so he taught himself Ladino and translated the English Me'em Lo'ez from the original Ladino. I'm not an expert in these things, but I've heard from several people who are considered experts that Aryeh Kaplan's English translation of the Me'em Lo'ez is more accurate than the Hebrew version that was translated from the Ladino. So take that for what you will. But the point is that this is an amazing research. What happened? At some point, somebody decided, based on Rav Herzog's unpublished manuscript suggesting that tchelis was made from this particular snail, that they were going to begin production of tchelis and make their own tchelis. And this became a move that some people embraced wholeheartedly, working with the assumption of, listen, how bad could it be? And they started making tchelis. I don't know anything, full disclosure, about their production methods. I don't know if they're using thousands and thousands of snails in order to be able to get it. But it sounds like it's a very expensive process. Somehow, I don't think that these tchelis, tzitzis, and talesim are being sold for that kind of money that would justify thousands and thousands of snails, being cut to be able to get that little bit of dye out of it. I don't know. Like I say, I don't know. But this became a big question. Do you wear tchelis or do you not? And there are some people who right away embraced it and other people who did not. And this became a question. Not so much anymore. People don't really, people who have embraced this tchelis based on the manuscript are basically wearing their tchelis and they feel very good about it and they're fine. And the people who are not, and it's not a major issue anymore that you hear discussed in the frum community. Very rarely will somebody actually come over to me and ask me, what do you think about the tchelis, or why aren't you wearing the tchelis, etc. So, but back then, at the time, it was really a major issue. And the arguments went back and forth. I'm not qualified to argue on all of them. But I do know the one thing that was said in the name of Reb Chaim Briska in regard to tchelis. The lashon of the Gemara is that the chilazon was hidden away, which means that it's not going to reappear, says Reb Chaim, until Mashiach comes. So anyone who thinks that they have found the real chilazon is clearly mistaken, because it's hidden. It's hidden like the aron is hidden away. It's hidden like certain other things, like the oragonus, like certain things, like Levyasan, certain things that are hidden away, la'asid lavai. And in fact, the word tchelis, is related to the word tachlis, the purpose, the end, and that it represents the end of time. And it represents the geula, and it represents midas harachmim, all these kind of things. So it was hidden away after the Churban. We don't have it now. And so the Reb Chaim's position is anyone who tells you that they found it is clearly mistaken. Because it doesn't say we forgot what it is or we don't know. There's certain things we say we don't know, right? I'll give you an example. How do you make matzah? Well, the Mishnah gives you the recipe. Take flour and water, knead it, form it into a ball, slam it on the side of the tanor, wait till it's baked, and peel it off. That's a matzah. Today we call it a lafa or an eish tanor, one of those big flat pitas that we use for falafel or for shawarma or something like that. But that was a matzah, which makes Hillel make a lot more sense, because he would take the korban pesach and the marah and the matzah and he would make a sandwich. So we sit there at the Seder with these crackers and lettuce, and we take a bite out of it and the whole thing crumbles onto us, or we're picking up pieces of it and eating it, and you think, what was Hillel thinking? Imagine if this was a meat sandwich. So he had a matzah that was basically a lafa. And he put in the roast lamb, and he put in the lettuce, and he rolled it up, and invented shawarma. His was the first shawarma, and he would lean back on the couch with a glass of warm wine. This used to be a great religion, you know. But what happened? We're afraid that it wasn't baked through all the way. This is before we get into the Gabrachs people, you know. We're afraid that it wasn't baked all the way. Maybe some of the inside wasn't baked. So therefore, we make them very thin. We put holes in them, and we burn them. So you end up with these crackers. Yeah, that's not what a matzah obviously was supposed to be, but we don't remember. We don't remember. There are people today who do not eat figs and certain other fruits and vegetables because they say we don't know how to check them well enough for bugs. Yeah. I heard from Rav Shadmi, who was a Talmud of Rav Scheinberg, that Rav Scheinberg would eat figs. He'd cut them open, and he would look. He says, I don't see anything. And he would eat it. You know, I heard the same thing from two Gedolim about strawberries. You know, that they asked him, how do you clean the strawberries? And he says, you cut off the top, and you cut them in half, and you rinse them off in salty water, and that's it. So he says, yeah, but certain Rabbanim say that they're filled with bugs and you can't eat them. And I heard this from B'Shem two Gedolei Torah. I heard it B'Shem Rabbi Scheinberg, and I heard it from Rav Dovid. So they said, but Rabbi so-and-so says you can't eat them because they're filled with bugs. So he says, so tell him not to eat them. Well, I check, and I don't see any bugs, you know. So the fellow who told me the story, he says he once met a Talmud of one of these Rabbanim, and he says, he's told him over the story. He says, yeah, you have to look at it with with like a microscope. He says, yeah, but that's not the din. The din is you have to be able to see it with the naked eye. And that doesn't apply if I need a microscope to see them, you know. In any event, the point is that people just say, we don't know how to do it today. We don't know how. So that's coming out of ignorance. Or maybe my favorite example is a woman becomes a nida when she sees dam. But how do you know if it's dam nida or not? There are a lot of different types of damim out there. So picture, if you will, pure red, whatever pure red is, and keep making it darker and darker and darker and darker and darker until you come to black. And imagine, 100 different shades. And now take the pure red and make it lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter until you come to pure white. And now do the same thing with gray and make it grayer and grayer and grayer. I forgot the words. One of those are shades, one of those are tints, one of those are hues, but they're different things. You're left with hundreds of red. So if you go to the paint store and you say, I want red paint, they'll hand you this little card with 5 different types of red, and then they have like 100 cards like that. Of all of those red, only 4 of them are considered tamei, says the Mishnah. Yeah. And it describes it if you want to find it. Take the dirt from a particular place and put it in a bucket of water and stir it up, and the color of the water that comes up. Or go to a particular field of flowers and watch it from a distance, the color that hovers over it. So this is a very specialized thing to be able to identify what it is. It's very hard. And even in the time of the Gemara, this is very, very few people are able to do this, to be able to identify this. Somebody asked me once, why don't you make a color chart? And the answer is because they fade. It's interesting. There's an entire field called art restoration where they take certain classics works and they clean it up. And it ends up that over the years, from the dirt and the fading, etc., the picture, the painting that was made was much brighter and more vivid and, than what we have for us today, but it's faded. So if I would have a color chart and it fades a little bit, then that's it. You're going to paskin the wrong halacha now. So you just had to be able to spot that. And today There are very few people who, at the time of the Gemara, they said, you can't do it. So we were guys on all red. Any shade, hue or tint or anything of red is tamei. It's just we don't know. We just don't know anymore. Yeah, it's not because of that. But here by the Tchelis, it doesn't say we don't know what the chilazon is. It says the chilazon was hidden away. And that was the argument for the people who say you can use whatever footnote you want in, Rav Herzog's unpublished work. It doesn't help you because if you don't know that this is it, then you can't use it. All right. And other people say it's lo malav lo mamorid. It doesn't hurt to put it on. How bad could it be, etc., etc. At the time when this was going on, it was a hot topic. Like I say, not so much now. And people ask me about it. I gave the following answer, but before I give you my answer, I'll give you a background to the answer. I had a good friend, Rabbi Binyamin Hammer, a really good friend. We go back to 1982. He was just nifta this past year, and I still have a hole in my heart. In fact, he hosted us for Shabbos, my wife and me and some of the children for Shabbos up in the mountains. And he was nifta like 2 weeks later. And I remember he called me the next Shabbos and say what a wonderful time they had. We really have to spend more time together and we have to be more in touch. And that week he was nifta. So, but he is a straight arrow. He doesn't know from Chachmas. He's very, very straight. Yasha. He's a really Yasha guy. And I told him once that, sometimes Friday night between Kabbalah, Shabbos, and Ma'ariv, someone gets up to give a little halachic talk. For most people, this is an opportunity for them to catch up on some much-needed sleep, but some of them are actually very engaging. So this one fellow, who is a bona fide Talmid Chacham, got up there, and he said that, according to his learning, everyone does atifas talis wrong. The standard way people put on their talis is they throw it over their head, wrap it around, and throw it over their shoulder like a continental soldier, you understand? And, and make the bracha and take it off. So he brings rayas that no, it's supposed to be like the atifas of the Aravim, of the Arabs, and it's supposed to be only around your head. So he demonstrated how he believes it's supposed to be. He put it on over his head just till his eyes, and then wrapped it around his head, not around his whole body. And he brought a lot of rayas. I was very impressed. I'm very impressionable. Very impressionable. I am also a cynic. I am a cynic. But when I hear things, I'm always impressionable. I hear it. I was like, well, it makes sense, So I said this over to Rabbi Binyamin one time. And he said to me something that I just found to be such a devastating response. He says, I don't know. So I learned in Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim, and I watched Rav Henech put on his talis, and he does it the way that my father did it, and my grandfather did it. Throws it over his head and throws it over their shoulders. Yeah? And I went to MTJ, and I saw Moshe Feinstein put on his talis, and he did it the same way that my father did it, my grandfather did it. And I watched Reb Dovid put on his talis, and he did it the same way Reb Moshe and my father and my grandfather did it. So I don't know, you can make all the diyukim you want, but we have something called a Masorah. And I was like, wow. That was such a burst of clarity for me. Because, yeah, it's true. Everybody wants to come up with their own chiddush when we say in Shmona Esrei, Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avosenu. We have a tradition. L'toiv v'l'ra. That's what Rav Dessler says, that when we say the Al Chetz, She'en anu azi panuk shei oiref. We're not stiff-necked and brazen. Lema v'necha, Hashem Elokeinu k'avosenu, tzadikim anachnu v'lo chatanu, avo anachnu v'avoseinu chatanu. We and our fathers have sinned. Why are we dragging our fathers into it? And the answer is because people sometimes do things because their parents did it and they're copying their parents. You know? My daughter, who teaches in seminary, she used to do this devastating impersonation of seminary girls. And they would say things like, we curse. My family, we curse. Everybody curses. I don't know. That's what my father does. That's what we do. We all curse. And she's trying to explain to me, I don't know. That's what we do in our family. That's what we do. So, you know, just because you do it doesn't mean that this is proper behavior. Masha Ein Kain. I've said this many times. My father was not Shomer Shabbos until he was 67 years old. But he grew up in a Shomer Shabbos house. And whatever he remembered from his father's house, he would do. And he spent my December yeshiva day school, and I'd come home and fight with him and say, Dad, that's not what you're supposed to do. You know, my father always used onion for karpas. And I said, they taught us in school you're supposed to use parsley. He says, my father used onion, I'm going to use onion. So, of course, I fought with him because that was the kind of person I was. And so we would put out on the Seder plate onion and parsley, and every year he would make fun of me. Yeah, here's your parsley, and he would eat onion. Years later, I found in the Haggadah of Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, where he says, for karpas, you're supposed to use onion. And he says, v'yeshmi, and there are those who use petrozelia, parsley. He says, and that's ridiculous. Nobody eats parsley. You'd make a shahako on it. It's just a spice or a garnish. Nobody eats it. I said, my father had him a car. If there was something that he did, even though he didn't know anything, he remembered it. He got this from his father. And he would follow through with that tradition. So there's a concept of a Masorah. What do we do? And you have to be very careful when it comes to the way that Klal Yisrael does things. The Chazon Ish had an interesting tshuva that he had written, where they discovered Rishonim. They discovered Rishonim who had been lost to history, and were found later. And the Chazon Ish maintained that HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes care of the Masorah. And if these people were lost to history, it's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want their views to be taken into account by deciding halacha. So if you suddenly find another Rishon who says something different, you can't suddenly go and turn around the halacha because, I have somebody else. No, HaKadosh Baruch Hu supervises it in such a way so that if Klal Yisrael has a way of doing things, and suddenly I come up and say, no, I think it should be like this. I came up with a new idea. We're very suspicious. We're very suspicious. And that was, of course, the principle of the Chassam Sofer, Chadash Asim in the Torah. You know, innovation makes us very suspicious to do something that we have never seen before. And you have to be careful. So all of that was by way of introduction. At the time, when people who were very pro-tchelis of this new tchelis that was on the market asked me, why don't you wear tchelis? I said, if Scheinberg is alive and he wears many, many pairs of tzitzis, I don't see any tchelis there. There's a story that the tchelis people gave him a pair of tzitzis and he took them. But there is no edus that he ever wore it. Yeah. But I said, look, I don't have to be smarter than the Gedolei Torah. When I see Rabbi Yosef put them on, when I see Reb Dovid Feinstein put them on, when I see Reb Shlomo Zalman put them on, I think Reb Shach was still alive. When I see Reb Shach put them on, when I see Reb Moshe Shapiro put them on, then I'll put them on for sure. I see Rebbeim. But if the Gedolei Torah are not putting them on, so you want me to be smarter than them and say, hey, I figured out what the real tchelis is, and you didn't. because you don't know. That's not the way my Judaism works. There's a Masorah. There's a tradition. And if somebody comes up with something that's newfangled, I use the principle of the Chassam Sofer, Chadash Asur Min HaTorah. My father didn't have it. My grandfather didn't have it. People didn't have it. Now, I'm not talking about a technological advance, right? And they came out with pot-bellied stoves. So I think it was Rabbi Kiva Eger. I think the story goes that they wanted to install one in the shul. And some people said, our parents never had it. Our grandparents never had it. And he said, so, because our parents and grandparents were freezing, we have to freeze? That's an innovation. I heard a story, and again, I didn't check it out because I'm not Pesach Kron, but I heard the story that the Reb Chaim Kanievsky, who took over his father, the Stipler's house, there was no air conditioning. It was a very small house. And Bnei Brak is gefährlich. It is so unbelievably hot and humid. It's 5 to 10 degrees away from Gehenna. Only it's more humid. So it's really tough. And they asked him, why don't you put in air conditioning? And he said, because my father didn't have air conditioning. So I don't need air conditioning. And finally, someone said to him, okay, forget about you. What about us? We're sitting here waiting online and we're schmaltzing. Put it in for us. So that he was willing to do. Yeah. And after they put in the air conditioning, he said, this is how I've heard the story, and I didn't check it out. This is how I heard. He says, I'm going to have to give a din v'cheshbon for all the learning I did during those summers without air conditioning. I don't know if I was at peak capacity. So, okay, that's a technological innovation. No one's talking about that. You don't still have to write your Chidushei Torah with a quill and ink, on paper. You can use a pen or a word processor to be able to write them up. You don't have to use that. It's a technological advance. That's fine. But when it comes to innovation in our observance, my attitude is when I see my Rebbeim, when I see the Gedolei Torah do it, then I'll introduce it. And if not, then I don't have to be smarter than the Gedolei Torah. And that's my position on it. So I'm not here to judge anybody, what you do or what you don't do. That is my position, and that's how I would approach this topic. And now, after having answered that question, we come to the question and answer portion of our program. And the question and answer is sponsored by Shana Weinberg Gordon, Leiloi Nishmas, Avram Eliezer ben Yaakov Eliyahu. Thank you, Rabbi Orlofsky, for the chizuk you give. Thank you for listening, because without anybody listening, this would be a very sad thing, just sitting here in my room talking to myself. Anonymous asks, when did the period of the Achronim end? Who was the last one? And what's our current Jewish history period called? Okay, let's put this into perspective. There was the period of the Tanakh. When the Tanakh ended, we went into the period of the Tanoim, and that ended basically with the publishing of the Mishnah. Yeah, and that began the period of the Amoraim, and the Amoraim basically ended with the closing of the Gemara by Marba, Rav Ashi, and Ravina. That basically finished that project. Then we went through a period known as the Savroyim and the Gaonim, and that went on somewhere till around the year 1000, when we began the period that was known as the Rishonim. Now, you could argue the Rishonim started a little earlier, etc., but that went on. When did the period of the Rishonim end? That's an argument. A lot of people will say it ended with the Shulchan Aruch. The Tur, Yaakov Bal HaTurim, who was a son of the Rosh, was definitely considered a Rishon. But when Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch, certainly around that time, it was considered the end of the Rishonim and the beginning of the period of the Achronim. And the Achronim goes on through the 15, 16, 1700s. According to most people, definitely into the 1800s, the Achronim. So, Chassam Sofer and Rabbi Akiva Eger, etc. Once you hit the 1900s, there's some discussion. Are we still in the period of the Achronim or not? And there are those who say, yes, these are still the Achronim. So that the great Rosh Yeshiva, Reb Baruch Ber, Reb Ruvain, Reb Shimon, Reb Shmuel, all of these people are considered in the period of Achronim. Some people say not. Some people want to say that it ended before that. Right? It didn't really go into the 1900s, but okay. But that's, but most people seem to feel that once we hit into the 1970s, the period of the Achronim was basically over at the 1980s. So where are we now? Now, I'll be full disclosure. Definitely not everybody feels that way. Rabbi Orlofsky, so sein gesund und stark, who he would argue with Achronim all the time, and he felt that he had the din of an Achron. Yeah. And there are certain other examples of this, yeah, where the famous story with the Chavetz Chaim, that when the Chavetz Chaim wrote his Sefer Chavetz Chaim, he brought it to Rabbi Yisrael Salanta for Haskama. And Rabbi Yisrael asked him the following question: how do you do tshuva for Lashon Hara? So he said, well, you have to tell the person what you said. He says, it can't be. He said to Yisrael, it can't be. He says, it's Erev Yom Kippur. I go over to somebody and I say, listen, I feel very bad. I spoke Lashon Hara about you. I told everybody that you're a crook and you're a lowlife and you're this and that thing. Please be meichel me. So the guy will be meichel him because it's Erev Yom Kippur. And so now this guy walks into Yom Kippur and he feels like a big tzaddik. I got kapara for what I did. And this guy's spending the whole Yom Kippur saying, everyone thinks I'm a thief and I'm a lowlife and I'm this. Can't be. So the Chavetz Chaim said, yeah, but Rabbeinu Yoina paskins that way in Shari Tshuva. That's what you have to do. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanta said, Afal Pikein, it can't be. So someone asked this question to Rav Aaron Kotler. He says, Lemaisa, he's right. It's a Rishon. The Chavetz Chaim was right. And he said, Be'inyane Musa, Rabbi Yisrael Salanta had the din of a Rishon. Okay? The Vilna Gaon would often argue with Rishonim, even though he was in the 1700s, past the time of the Rishonim, but he was seen as somebody who was out of the door. So none of these laws are hard and fast. But certainly, according to most people, by the time you hit the second half of the 20th century, the period of the Achronim have ended. So what is that position? What is where we are today? I've heard two terms for it. One is we're in the Acharei Achronim. I've heard that term. And the one that's perhaps even cuter is with the Dor HaMalaktim. We gather together. What does that mean? Somebody puts out a sefer, whatever, Kidneys Kehilchasai. And he takes one of the computer programs and he searches for all the sources and he puts it all together and sets it up. It's interesting, Rabbi Yisrael Stillerman, who is a Rosh Chabura in the Mir, he put out a series of Svarim on different topics, and he calls it Dor Malaktim, where he pulls together all the different shittas and lines them up for you so that you can make a more informed decision. So when you ask him a question, he says, well, these poskim say yes, and these poskim say no. And I have to really press him to find out what he thinks the halacha is, but he doesn't want to get involved. But we're gathering it together. So I guess today we could say we're in the door of the malaktim, those who gather the information together. And that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, You can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com, and I have other material there that you can read or listen to. You can sign up for one of our online shiurim. You can ask a question, sponsor an episode, please. Sponsor a question and answer. Thank you. Sponsor a Parsha 5. We need your help to be able to keep going. Submit your resume if you want to become the next producer of the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And that's it for this episode. Until next time, I am Dovid Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.